The missile launch sequence is a legacy threat, a distraction. The public is conditioned to watch the skies for incoming kinetic events, a paradigm rendered obsolete by modern systemic warfare. The high kinetic cost and social liability of conventional conflict, evidenced by reports of potential 2 million person casualty counts, have made drawn-out land wars a solvency crisis for any major power. The primary vector for a first strike is not explosive. It is silent. The true target is not a city, but the global nervous system, the 1.3 million kilometers of subsea fiber optic cables that carry 99% of all intercontinental data traffic, including trillions in financial transactions. Severing these nodes is not an act of war. It is an act of erasure. It is a strategic-level decapitation that blinds the opponent. Command and control, financial markets, logistics, energy grids, all go to zero. There is no explosion, only the systemic shutdown of a civilization, a digital dark age executed in minutes. This action creates the blind Leviathan. A superpower state, stripped of its sensory input, becomes a cornered animal. Without data, it cannot verify the nature of the attack. It cannot differentiate a limited strike from an existential one. Internal weakness and social divisions, which analysts warn are being incited domestically, ensure there is no resilience for this level of shock. In this state of total blindness and existential panic, the only rational protocol is a launch-on-warning posture. The blind Leviathan cannot absorb the first hit. It must assume the worst-case scenario is already in motion. This mathematically guarantees a disproportionate and likely nuclear response to an attack it cannot even see. This is the blueprint for asymmetric escalation. A nation-state is not a family. It is a corporation with a flag. When its core business, projecting power, becomes unprofitable, it faces a solvency crisis. The war in Ukraine is not a geopolitical passion play. It is a mathematical liability. Analysts at CSIS calculate that the immense kinetic cost, with casualty estimates approaching catastrophic levels, has rendered conventional warfare politically and economically unsustainable for Russia. The domestic front cannot bear the weight of a protracted conflict, especially when internal vectors of division are already being activated. This is not a failure of strategy, it is a balance sheet reality. When the cost of victory through conventional means exceeds the nation's ability to pay, the system pivots. It shifts from a symmetric battlefield to an asymmetric protocol. This is a conscious strategic decision, not a panicked reaction. The leadership, facing a solvency event at home, is incentivized to find a cheaper, more leveraged instrument of power. That instrument is the limited kinetic strike. It's a gambit that externalizes the crisis, designed to short-circuit the existing paradigm. Weakness forces this pivot. A state fractured by internal social division, as analysts warn is a systemic risk in the West, cannot prosecute a popular unified war effort. It is a mathematical impossibility. Therefore, it must choose a conflict that does not require popular support. The blueprint, evidenced by past strategic considerations regarding actors like Iran, is to launch a strike so provocative that it forces an existentially threatened target into its only rational move: disproportionate retaliation. This action intentionally triggers a wider systemic conflict, transforming a domestic solvency crisis into a global liquidity event. The solvency crisis in conventional warfare is now a mathematical certainty. Analysts at the Royal United Services Institute, RUSI, have quantified this systemic liability. They place the kinetic cost of a single main battle tank at approximately $5 million. That entire asset can now be neutralized, removed from the board by a $500 first-person view drone. This inversion of the cost-per-kill ratio is a protocol known as the democratization of violence. It means high lethality capability is no longer the exclusive domain of solvent superpowers. For a fraction of the cost, smaller state or non-state actors can achieve asymmetric leverage, making a conventional ground invasion an unsustainable economic proposition. This forces planners away from costly attrition, evidenced by reports of immense potential casualties, and toward the limited strike, the very trigger for disproportionate retaliation. The global instability you are being shown is not the core threat. It is the staging ground. Regions like the Middle East are designated proxy laboratories, live fire environments for testing escalation protocols before they are deployed on a wider scale. Travel advisories, as noted by Travel and Tour World, are not merely for tourists. They are data points measuring the operational stability of these gray zones. The pivot to this strategy is a function of cost. Conventional warfare has become a national liability. A recent report warns that combined casualties in the Ukraine conflict could reach 2 million. This level of attrition represents a solvency crisis for any superpower, draining both manpower and treasury. It is an unsustainable model of conflict. This external liability is compounded by engineered internal weakness. When political figures such as Representative Taylor Greene state the population is being incited into civil war, it is a diagnostic, not an opinion. It confirms that the domestic front is too fractured to sustain the unity required for a large-scale, conventional military campaign. This isn't a mistake. It's a feature of the new battlefield. The gray zone is the mathematical solution to this dilemma. According to CSIS analysis, these zones allow state actors to test limited kinetic strikes and gauge response thresholds without incurring the full kinetic cost of a symmetrical war. The objective is to calibrate the asymmetric escalation protocol. Consider the reports of potential new strikes on Iran, as detailed by CNN. This is the protocol in motion. A limited strike is launched against an existentially threatened adversary. The mathematical certainty is that their only rational response is disproportionate retaliation. That retaliation then becomes the manufactured casus belli for a wider, pre-authorized conflict. The gray zone was never the endgame. It is the ignition sequence. The launch on warning doctrine is not a contingency plan. It is a mathematical protocol. It dictates that a nation launches its nuclear arsenal upon detection of an inbound enemy strike, before those enemy warheads detonate. The logic is a zero-sum calculation. Waiting for impact confirmation risks the total annihilation of your own retaliatory capability. You don't launch on impact, you launch on the signal of impact. The systemic risk vector is the fog of digital war, a term used by analysts at CSIS. A hostile actor does not need to launch a physical missile. A sophisticated cyber attack can blind the target's early warning system, the satellites and ground-based radar. The screens go black. The signal is lost. At this moment, the command authority has no way to differentiate between a network failure and a coordinated, decapitating first strike. The commander is now cornered by the protocol. To do nothing is to bet the nation's existence on the hope that the blackout is benign. This is an unacceptable liability. The doctrine's logic forces the only rational decision under conditions of absolute uncertainty. Assume the worst-case scenario. A limited, non-kinetic cyber attack thus forces a full, unrestrained kinetic response. This is asymmetric escalation by design, leveraging digital ambiguity to guarantee a physical and potentially nuclear outcome. The kinetic cost of conventional ground war is now a national solvency crisis. Reports warn of combined casualties in a single theater approaching 2 million. Simultaneously, internal political vectors, described by domestic observers as an incitement into civil war, have nullified the state's capacity for sustained, large-scale mobilization. This is not weakness. It is a mathematical liability that forces a change in protocol. When a superpower cannot afford the price of victory, it re-engineers the definition of conflict. The playbook shifts from attrition to leverage. CSIS and RUSI analysts confirm that strategic discussions have pivoted from force-on-force engagement to targeted economic dislocation. As outlined in assessments of the Middle East crisis, the primary vector for applying this leverage is energy infrastructure, directly linking kinetic action to global oil prices and market panic. This leads to the calibration shot, a deniable, attribution-impossible kinetic event designed to test an adversary's response thresholds. It is the modern equivalent of a launch-on-warning drill, but for economic and political warfare. The logic is irrefutable. If a major new strike is considered too escalatory, a crippling blow disguised as an accident becomes the only rational alternative. Within the next 12 months, a major Persian Gulf energy port or its primary data control center will experience a catastrophic, cascading blackout. The event will be officially attributed to systemic malfunction or a non-state cyber attack. This is the probe. It is not the war. It is the mathematical question being asked of a target. Will you absorb the blow, or will you escalate asymmetrically and trigger the protocol?